I was standing in the elevator, exhausted after pulling another 14-hour day, when I received the text that would change everything. It was from our department head, Chen, and it was supposed to be good news. Great work on the summit. Industry's presentation today, Amanda's strategic approach was exactly what we needed. Looking forward to the implementation meeting tomorrow. My blood went cold. Amanda's strategic approach? I read the message 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood something, but the words stayed the same. The Summit Industries campaign wasn't Amanda's work. It was mine. Every single detail, every data point, every innovative solution had come from months of my research, my late nights, my creative problem solving. And somehow, Amanda Thompson had not only presented it as her own, but had convinced our boss that she was the mastermind behind the entire strategy. Standing there in that elevator, watching the floors tick by, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was calculated theft. And I was about to show Amanda exactly what happens when you steal from someone who actually knows their work inside and out. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, and 8 months ago, I thought I'd finally made it. After graduating with my MBA and drowning in student debt for 2 years, I'd landed my dream job as a marketing analyst at Bright Tech Solutions, a growing tech startup in Austin, Texas. I was 28, ambitious, and ready to prove that all those late nights studying and working multiple jobs to pay for school had been worth it. I'd moved to Austin with nothing but my beat-up Honda Civic, 2 suitcases, and a determination to build something meaningful in the marketing world. Bright Tech wasn't just any company. It was the kind of innovative, fast-growing startup where ideas mattered more than tenure, where creativity could actually make a difference. At least, that's what I thought when I first walked through their modern glass doors, past the exposed brick walls and trendy open workspace that screamed, "We're changing the world." The company specialized in customer retention software for mid-sized businesses, and I was hired specifically to help develop marketing strategies that would showcase how our technology could transform client relationships. My first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. I threw myself into understanding our clients, analyzing their pain points, and developing targeted campaigns that actually moved the needle. I wasn't just creating pretty graphics or writing catchy slogans. I was diving deep into data, identifying patterns and crafting strategies that delivered real results. My supervisor, Chen, seemed impressed with my analytical approach and my ability to translate complex data into actionable marketing insights. But there was one person on our small marketing team who made me feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells, Amanda Thompson. She was 32, had been with the company for 3 years, and held the title of Senior Marketing Coordinator. Amanda had this way of making every conversation feel like a subtle competition, always ready with a comment that sounded supportive, but left me questioning myself. When I'd share an idea in team meetings, she'd nod encouragingly and then somehow find a way to build on it in a way that made her contribution seem more significant than mine. At first, I attributed her behavior to workplace dynamics. Maybe she felt threatened by the new person with fresh ideas. Maybe she was just trying to be helpful in her own way. I'd grown up being taught to give people the benefit of the doubt, to work hard and let my results speak for themselves. So when Amanda started asking to review my work just to make sure we're aligned, I saw it as collaboration, not competition. The Summit Industries project started in late July, when Michael called me into his office with an opportunity that could make or break my early career at Bright Tech. Summit Industries was one of our biggest potential clients, a manufacturing company with over 5,000 employees who were struggling with customer retention rates that had dropped 15% over the past 2 years. They were considering switching to our software platform, but they wanted to see a comprehensive marketing strategy that would demonstrate how we could help them not just retain customers, but actually increase engagement and loyalty. This was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been waiting for. It wasn't just about creating a campaign. It was about proving that I could develop a strategic approach that would solve real business problems. Michael told me I had 3 months to develop a complete retention strategy, including data analysis, campaign recommendations, budget projections, and implementation timelines. If Summit Industries liked what they saw, it would be worth over $2 million in annual revenue for BrightTech, and it would establish me as someone who could handle major client relationships. I threw myself into the project with an intensity that surprised even me. I started each day at 7 in the morning, diving into Summit Industries' customer data, analyzing their purchasing patterns, and identifying the specific points where they were losing clients. I stayed late into the evening, cross-referencing their data with industry benchmarks and competitor analysis. I spent my weekends researching case studies of successful retention campaigns, reading marketing journals, and teaching myself advanced analytics techniques that weren't covered in my MBA program. The work was consuming, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time since starting at BrightTech, I felt like I was operating at my full potential. I wasn't just following templates or executing someone else's vision, I was creating something entirely new, a strategic approach that combined emotional marketing with data-driven insights in a way that could genuinely transform how Summit Industries connected with their customers. As the weeks passed, I began to see patterns in Summit Industries' customer behavior that nobody had noticed before. Their highest value clients weren't just purchasing products, they were buying into a relationship with the company's brand, values. But somewhere in their communication strategy, that emotional connection was getting lost. Customers were being treated like transaction numbers instead of valued partners, and they were responding by taking their business elsewhere. My solution was to develop a multi-layered campaign that would reestablish emotional connections while using our software's capabilities to personalize every interaction. Instead of generic follow-up emails and standardized customer service responses, Summit Industries could use our platform to create tailored experiences that made each customer feel valued and understood. The campaign included everything from personalized welcome sequences for new customers to targeted re-engagement strategies for clients who hadn't made a purchase in 6 months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the real innovation was in the data analysis component. I'd figured out how to use predictive analytics to identify customers who were at risk of leaving before they actually made the decision to switch providers. By monitoring engagement, patterns, purchase frequency, and response rates to communications, we could proactively reach out to these at-risk customers with personalized retention offers that addressed their specific concerns. The more I worked on the project, the more excited I became about its potential. This wasn't just a marketing campaign. It was a comprehensive customer relationship transformation that could serve as a model for other clients. I could already imagine presenting this strategy at industry conferences, maybe even publishing case studies about the results we achieved. Throughout this entire process, Amanda had been hovering around the edges of the project. She'd stop by my desk regularly, asking how things were going, offering to help with any overflow work, and suggesting that we should collaborate more closely. I appreciated her interest, but I was protective of this project. It was my opportunity to prove myself, and I wanted to make sure every detail was perfect before sharing it with anyone else. About 6 weeks into the project, Amanda's check-ins became more frequent and more specific. She'd ask to see my research methodology, request copies of my data analysis, and suggest that she could help with the presentation design. Her requests always sounded reasonable, framed as team collaboration and knowledge sharing. When she said things like, "I just want to make sure I understand your approach in case Michael asks me about it," or "maybe we should align our strategies so the whole team is on the same page," it seemed like the kind of professional cooperation that was encouraged at BrightTech. Against my better judgment, I started sharing pieces of my work with Amanda. Not the complete strategy. I was still too possessive of that. but enough information for her to understand my general approach. I showed her my customer segmentation analysis, explained my methodology for identifying at-risk customers, and even walked her through some of the personalization strategies I was developing. Amanda was an attentive audience, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. She seemed genuinely impressed with my work, praising my analytical approach and telling me how creative my solutions were. It felt good to have someone acknowledge the effort I was putting in, especially since I'd been working so intensively that I hadn't had much time for social interaction outside of the office. Looking back now, I can see that Amanda was systematically learning every aspect of my strategy, but at the time, her interest felt like validation. Here was a senior team member who recognized the quality of my work and wanted to understand my thinking. When she suggested that we should schedule regular check-ins to keep the collaboration flowing, I agreed readily. Our collaboration sessions became weekly meetings where I'd update Amanda on my progress and she'd offer feedback and suggestions. Most of her input was helpful. She had experience with client presentations that I lacked, and she knew Michael's preferences better than I did. But gradually, I noticed that her suggestions were becoming more directive. Instead of asking questions about my approach, she was suggesting alternative strategies. Instead of offering to help with execution, she was proposing changes to the fundamental concept. During one particularly intense session in mid-September, Amanda suggested that we should restructure the entire presentation to focus more heavily on the emotional marketing components and less on the technical data analysis. She argued that clients like Summit Industries would be more impressed by creative campaigns than by statistical analysis, and that we should position the strategy as a brand transformation rather than a retention optimization project. I pushed back, explaining that the data analysis was the foundation of the entire strategy. Without the predictive analytics component, we'd just be offering another generic marketing campaign. The whole point was to combine emotional connection with data-driven personalization in a way that was genuinely innovative. Amanda listened to my explanation, nodded thoughtfully, and then said something that should have been a red flag. "You're absolutely right, Jess. Your technical approach is brilliant. I think I was just worried about how to present it in a way that Michael and the clients will immediately understand. But you know your work better than anyone." At the time, her response felt like acknowledgement and respect. She was deferring to my expertise and recognizing that this was my project. But now I realized she was gathering intelligence, learning exactly how passionate I was about each component, so she could decide what to emphasize when she inevitably stole credit for the work. The final month of the project was a blur of 18-hour days and caffeine-fueled creative sessions. I was refining every detail of the strategy, creating comprehensive implementation timelines, and developing budget projections that would demonstrate exactly how Summit Industries could expect to see return on their investment. I was also designing the presentation itself, creating visualizations that would make complex data accessible and compelling slides that would tell the story of customer transformation. Amanda continued to check in regularly, but her involvement felt more peripheral during this phase. She was busy with other projects, she said, but she wanted to stay updated on my progress in case she needed to brief Michael on our team's work. I was so focused on perfecting every element of the strategy that I didn't have time to question why she needed briefing materials or why she was asking for copies of my presentation drafts. 2 weeks before the final presentation, I finally felt ready to share my complete strategy with the team. I'd created a 90-slide presentation that walked through every aspect of the customer retention transformation, from initial data analysis to projected outcomes. The strategy was comprehensive, innovative, and backed by solid research. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, but I was also nervous about presenting it to Michael and potentially to Summit Industries executives. That's when Amanda made her final move. She suggested that since the presentation was so important to BrightTech's relationship with Summit Industries, maybe she should review it one more time before I presented it to Michael. She could offer feedback on the flow, help me anticipate questions, and make sure I was prepared for any challenging discussions. As a senior team member who'd been through similar presentations before, she could provide valuable perspective that would help me succeed. Her offer sounded generous and supportive. I was grateful for her willingness to help, especially since I was feeling the pressure of such a high-stakes presentation. So I shared my complete presentation with Amanda, along with my research files, data analysis, and implementation plans. I trusted her to provide constructive feedback that would help me deliver the best possible presentation. What I didn't know was that Amanda had already scheduled a meeting with Michael for the next morning. What I didn't realize was that she had no intention of helping me prepare for my presentation. Instead, she was planning to present my entire strategy as her own work, cutting me out of the project I'd spent 3 months developing. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, planning to spend some time rehearsing my presentation before the team meeting. But when I walked past the conference room, I saw Amanda inside with Michael, presenting my slides on the big screen. She was walking him through my customer segmentation analysis, explaining my predictive analytics methodology, and describing my personalization strategies as if she'd developed every single component herself. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching Amanda present 3 months of my work while Michael nodded approvingly and took notes. She was using my exact language, my specific examples, and even my personal insights about customer psychology. The only thing missing was any acknowledgement that another person had been involved in developing the strategy. That's when I received Michael's text congratulating Amanda on her brilliant work. And that's when I realized that my colleague hadn't just taken credit for my ideas. She'd stolen my entire career opportunity and left me with nothing but the knowledge of what I'd actually accomplished. But as I stood there watching Amanda bask in praise for my work, something crystallized in my mind. She might have stolen my presentation, but she didn't understand the strategy she was presenting. She knew the talking points, but she didn't know the underlying research. She could repeat my conclusions, but she couldn't explain my methodology. And tomorrow, when she had to present the detailed implementation plan to Summit Industries executives, she was going to discover exactly what it felt like to be exposed as a fraud. Because the presentation Amanda had stolen was just the overview. The real strategy, the detailed financial projections, the implementation timelines, the risk assessments, and the technical specifications, was still safely stored in my private files. And I was about to teach Amanda a lesson about the difference between stealing someone's work and actually understanding it. The rest of that day passed in a haze of disbelief and mounting anger. I kept replaying the scene I'd witnessed through the conference room glass, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd misunderstood what was happening. Maybe Amanda was just giving Michael a preliminary overview and would mention my involvement later. Maybe she was setting up the presentation for me to deliver the following week. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why she was presenting my work without mentioning my name even once. But deep down, I knew exactly what I'd seen. Amanda hadn't stumbled into taking credit for my work. She'd orchestrated it. Every conversation we'd had over the past month, every time she'd asked to review my materials, every suggestion she'd made about presentation strategy, it had all been leading to this moment. She'd been systematically learning my project so she could present it as her own, and I'd been naive enough to hand her everything she needed to steal 3 months of my life. I spent the afternoon at my desk in a strange state of suspended animation, mechanically responding to emails and attending scheduled meetings while my mind raced through everything that had happened. Colleagues walked by my cubicle, chatting about their lunch plans and weekend activities, completely unaware that my world had just imploded. I wanted to scream, to march into Michael's office and demand an explanation, to confront Amanda immediately and force her to admit what she'd done. But I also felt paralyzed by the magnitude of what had occurred. How do you prove that someone stole your work when they have access to all your files? How do you demonstrate your intellectual contribution when the thief is presenting your ideas? With complete confidence? How do you recover from professional betrayal when the person who betrayed you has seniority and established relationships that you lack? Around 3 o'clock, Amanda stopped by my desk with a bright smile and an energy that made my skin crawl. She was practically glowing with satisfaction, like someone who'd just received the best news of her career. Which I realized she essentially had, except the good news was built on a foundation of lies and theft. "Hey, Jess, how's your afternoon going?" she asked, leaning against my cubicle wall with casual friendliness. "I know you've been working so hard on that Summit Industries project. You must be relieved to have the preliminary presentation phase completed." The preliminary presentation phase, as if what she'd just stolen was somehow just a small component of a larger collaborative effort. As if my 3 months of intensive research and strategic development were merely the opening act for her more important contributions. I looked up at her, studying her face for any sign of guilt or acknowledgement of what she'd done. But Amanda's expression was perfectly composed, almost sympathetic. She was looking at me like a concerned colleague who wanted to check in on my well-being, not like someone who'd just committed professional theft. "I saw Michael's email about the presentation," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Congratulations on the positive feedback." Amanda's smile widened, and she settled more comfortably against my desk. "Thank you. I have to admit, I was nervous about presenting such a comprehensive strategy, but Michael seemed really impressed with the analytical approach. He particularly liked the predictive analytics component. He said it was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that sets Bright Tech apart from our competitors." She was quoting my work back to me, describing my innovations as if she'd developed them herself. The predictive analytics component that had taken me weeks to develop, the innovative thinking that had consumed my evenings and weekends, the analytical approach that represented everything I'd learned in graduate school and refined through months of practical application. Amanda was discussing it all with the casual ownership of someone describing their own accomplishments. "The client meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon," Amanda continued, seemingly oblivious to my stunned silence. "Michael wants me to present the detailed implementation strategy to Summit Industries' executive team. It's a big opportunity, but I think we're well prepared." We're well prepared. She was including me in the project again, but only as a supporting player in her starring role. Only as background assistance for her moment of professional triumph. "That's a quick turnaround," I managed to say. "Do you feel ready to discuss all the technical details?" For just a moment, Amanda's confident expression flickered. "Well, you know how these presentations go. The clients are usually more interested in the big picture strategy than the technical implementation specifics. But if they do have detailed questions, I can always follow up with additional information after the meeting." There it was, the first crack in her facade. Amanda was planning to wing the client presentation, hoping that Summit Industries executives would be satisfied with high-level concepts and wouldn't probe too deeply into the mechanics of implementation. She was counting on being able to deflect technical questions and maintain her illusion of expertise through confident presentation skills rather than actual knowledge. But I knew Summit Industries' leadership team from my research. They were engineers and operations managers who'd built their company through meticulous attention to detail and thorough analysis of every business decision. They weren't going to be impressed by vague promises and surface-level insights. They were going to ask specific questions about timelines, budget allocations, risk management, and measurable outcomes. They were going to want to understand exactly how our strategy would integrate with their existing systems and what kind of results they could expect at each stage of implementation. All of that information existed, but it was contained in files that Amanda had never seen. The presentation she'd stolen was just the executive summary, the compelling overview designed to generate interest and secure a follow-up meeting. The real strategy, the detailed project plans, financial projections, and implementation roadmaps that would actually convince Summit Industries to sign a $2 million contract, was still locked away in my private folders. As Amanda walked away from my desk, still radiating satisfaction with her successful theft, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and disbelief were hardening into something more focused and determined. She thought she'd outmaneuvered me, but she'd actually walked into a trap of her own making. By stealing credit for work she didn't understand, Amanda had positioned herself to fail spectacularly in front of the most important clients Brighttech had ever pursued. The question was whether I wanted to save her from that failure or let her discover the consequences of her actions. That evening, I drove home to my small apartment in South Austin, my mind churning with everything that had happened. I'd moved to Texas with such optimism about my new life and career, convinced that hard work and talent would be enough to succeed in a merit-based professional environment. The apartment itself reflected those early hopes. I'd carefully chosen furniture that was both functional and stylish, created a workspace where I could continue developing my skills, and decorated the walls with inspirational quotes about pursuing your dreams and creating your own success. Now, sitting in my living room with a glass of wine and the weight of professional betrayal settling over me, those inspirational messages felt naive and hollow. I'd worked harder than anyone else on the team, produced innovative results, and approached every challenge with enthusiasm and creativity. But none of that had protected me from a colleague who was willing to steal credit and manipulate relationships to advance her own career. I thought about calling my sister Maria, who lived back in San Antonio and always offered practical advice when I was struggling with work situations. But how do you explain that a coworker has stolen 3 months of your professional life? How do you describe the feeling of watching someone else receive praise for your intellectual contributions? How do you articulate the rage and helplessness of having your career trajectory hijacked by someone you'd trusted as a collaborator? Instead, I opened my laptop and began reviewing all the files that Amanda had never requested, all the detailed work that she'd never bothered to understand, the comprehensive implementation timeline that broke down the customer retention strategy into weekly action items, the detailed budget analysis that accounted for software licensing, staff training, and performance monitoring costs, the risk assessment matrix that identified potential obstacles and developed contingency plans for each scenario, the ROI projections that demonstrated exactly how Summit Industries could expect to see their investment pay off over the first 18 months. Amanda knew none of this existed. She'd been so focused on stealing the presentation that she'd never asked about the supporting documentation. She'd assumed that the 90 slides I'd shown her represented the complete scope of my work, not realizing that the presentation was just the marketing material for a much more comprehensive strategic plan. As I scrolled through months of detailed analysis and strategic planning, I began to understand the full scope of Amanda's miscalculation. She'd stolen the sizzle, but she had no idea about the steak. She could present my conclusions, but she couldn't explain my methodology. She could describe the desired outcomes, but she couldn't detail the process for achieving them. Tomorrow afternoon, when Summit Industries executives started asking specific questions about implementation, Amanda was going to discover the difference between presenting someone else's work and actually understanding it. And I was going to have to decide whether to rescue her from a humiliation of her own making or let her experience the consequences of professional theft. But as I sat there in my apartment, surrounded by months of my own hard work and innovative thinking, I realized that my decision had already been made. Amanda had chosen to steal credit for my contributions, to erase my involvement in a project that represented the best work of my career, to prioritize her own advancement over professional integrity and basic human decency. She'd made her choice. Now she could live with the consequences. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a clarity of purpose that surprised me. For the first time since witnessing Amanda's theft, I felt calm and focused rather than angry and helpless. I'd spent the evening analyzing the situation from every angle, and I'd concluded that Amanda's betrayal was actually an opportunity for me to demonstrate exactly what she'd stolen and why it mattered. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a professional outfit that made me feel confident and competent. I styled my hair and applied makeup with more attention than usual, preparing myself for what I knew would be a pivotal day in my career. Not because I was planning to present to Summit Industries, Amanda had stolen that opportunity, but because I was preparing to reveal the difference between authentic expertise and borrowed credibility. Amanda arrived at the office an hour later than usual, looking slightly frazzled and carrying multiple coffee cups. She was clearly feeling the pressure of her upcoming presentation, probably spending the morning reviewing my stolen slides and trying to memorize talking points for work she didn't actually understand. When she saw me at my desk, she hurried over with an expression of urgent concern. "Jess, thank goodness you're here early," she said, setting down her coffee and pulling up a chair next to my cubicle. "I've been thinking about the client presentation this afternoon, and I realized there might be some technical questions that require more detailed responses. Do you happen to have any additional documentation about the implementation process?" There it was. Less than 24 hours after stealing credit for my work, Amanda was asking me to provide the missing pieces that would make her theft complete. She wanted me to hand over the detailed implementation plans that would allow her to maintain her deception when Summit Industries executives started probing for specifics. I looked at her carefully, noting the slight tension around her eyes and the way she was fidgeting with her coffee cup. For all her confident presentation skills, Amanda was nervous about defending work she'd never actually done. She was beginning to realize that stealing a presentation was different from understanding the strategy behind it. "What kind of technical questions are you expecting?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and helpful. Amanda's relief was visible. She'd been worried that I might be suspicious about her sudden interest in implementation details, but my willingness to help seemed to reassure her that I was still the cooperative colleague she'd been manipulating for months. "Well, you know, how these executive teams can be," she said, settling into her chair with renewed confidence. "They always want to understand the nuts and bolts of implementation. Timeline details, budget breakdowns, that sort of thing. I want to make sure I'm prepared for any questions they might ask." Timeline details and budget breakdowns, the two areas where Amanda's lack of actual involvement would be most obviously exposed. She was asking me to provide the information that would allow her to perpetuate her theft, to give her the tools she needed to convincingly present my work as her own. "I do have some additional documentation," I said slowly. "Implementation timelines, detailed budget analysis, risk assessments. But it's pretty comprehensive material. Do you think you'll have time to review it all before this afternoon?" Amanda waved her hand dismissively. "I'm a quick study. Besides, I'm already familiar with the overall strategy, so I just need to fill in some of the details. If you could just send me whatever supplementary files you have, I'll review them over lunch." She wanted me to email her months of detailed work so she could review it over lunch and then present it as her own that afternoon. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also exactly what I'd expected. Amanda had become so comfortable with taking credit for my contributions that she saw nothing inappropriate about asking me to facilitate my own professional erasure. "Actually," I said, as if the idea had just occurred to me, "since this is such an important client meeting, maybe I should attend as well. You know, in case there are any technical questions that require really detailed responses, I could provide backup support during the presentation." Amanda's expression shifted, and I could see her calculating the risks of having me in the room when she presented my work as her own. If I was there to provide technical backup, I might inadvertently reveal that I was more familiar with the strategy than she was. Or worse, I might directly contradict something she said or demonstrate knowledge that she lacked, but she couldn't refuse my offer without seeming territorial or unprofessional. After all, she'd been positioning our relationship as collaborative, describing the Summit Industries project as team effort, even while taking sole credit for its development. "That's really thoughtful of you, Jess," she said finally. "But I think Michael wants to keep the presentation team small and focused. You know how overwhelming it can be for clients when too many people are involved in the discussion. But I really appreciate your offer to help." She was shutting me out of my own presentation, ensuring that I wouldn't be there to witness her failure or to correct any misunderstandings that might arise. Amanda wanted to maintain complete control over the narrative, to present my work without any risk that I might reveal the truth about its origins. "Of course," I said agreeably. "I completely understand, but the offer stands if you change your mind or if any unexpected questions come up." Amanda smiled and gathered her things, clearly eager to escape before I could ask any more probing questions about her preparation strategy. "Thanks again for all your support on this project, Jess. I know the client meeting will go smoothly." As she walked away, I opened my email and began typing a message to Michael Chen. It was time to ensure that I would be in that conference room this afternoon, whether Amanda wanted me there or not, because I wasn't going to let her destroy my work through incompetence after she'd already stolen credit for creating it. The message to Michael was carefully crafted to seem helpful rather than suspicious. I mentioned that Amanda had expressed some concerns about technical questions during the client presentation, and I offered to attend the meeting as backup support in case detailed implementation questions arose. I positioned my attendance as a way to ensure that Bright Tech presented the most comprehensive and accurate information possible to such an important prospective client. Michael's response arrived within 20 minutes, agreeing that having additional technical expertise in the room would be valuable for such a significant presentation. He thanked me for my proactive thinking and confirmed that I should attend the 2:00 meeting with Summit Industries' executive team. When Amanda discovered that I'd be attending the presentation after all, her reaction was immediate and revealing. She appeared at my desk within minutes of receiving Michael's email, her previous calm confidence replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "Jess, I just saw Michael's message about you joining the presentation," she said, attempting to keep her voice casual. "I thought we'd agreed that a smaller team would be more effective." "I didn't agree to anything," I replied calmly. "I offered to provide backup support, and Michael thought it would be valuable to have additional technical expertise available. I'm just trying to help ensure the meeting goes well." Amanda's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was trapped by her own narrative of collaboration and teamwork, unable to object to my presence without revealing that she was afraid of being exposed as unprepared. "Right, of course," she said stiffly. "I just want to make sure we're coordinated in our approach. Maybe we should meet briefly before the presentation to align our talking points." "That sounds great," I agreed. "Why don't you walk me through your presentation plan, and I'll let you know where I might be able to provide additional technical detail." The color drained from Amanda's face. She'd been hoping to use our coordination meeting to extract more information from me to fill in the gaps in her understanding before facing Summit Industries executives. Instead, I was asking her to demonstrate her knowledge of my own work. "Actually, you know what? I think we'll be fine," she said quickly. "I trust your judgment to jump in whenever additional detail would be helpful. No need to over-rehearse." As Amanda hurried away from my desk for the second time that morning, I could see the panic beginning to set in. She was starting to realize that stealing my presentation slides hadn't prepared her to defend the strategy behind them. And in less than 4 hours, she was going to discover exactly how unprepared she really was. The lunch hour came and went, and I watched Amanda frantically scrolling through documents on her computer, occasionally glancing up with the desperate expression of someone trying to cram for an exam they'd never studied for. She'd requested the supplementary files I'd mentioned, but I'd been strategically slow in responding, citing formatting issues and the need to organize the materials properly. Every delay was calculated to increase her anxiety and reduce her preparation time. At 1:30, 30 minutes before the Summit Industries presentation, Amanda appeared at my desk one final time. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by barely controlled panic and a thin veneer of professional composure that was cracking under pressure. "Jess, I hate to bother you again, but I'm still waiting for those implementation files," she said, her voice tight with stress. "The client meeting starts in half an hour, and I want to make sure I'm fully prepared for any technical questions." I looked up from my computer with what I hoped appeared to be genuine concern. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I've been having issues with the file compression. Some of the spreadsheets are quite large, and I wanted to make sure everything was properly organized before sending it over. Are you feeling anxious about the presentation?" The question was designed to probe exactly how unprepared she was, and Amanda's response confirmed my suspicions. She was operating entirely on borrowed knowledge, trying to present a strategy she'd never actually developed or understood. "Not anxious exactly," she said, attempting to project confidence she clearly didn't feel. "I just like to be thorough in my preparation. You know how important this client is to Brighttech's growth strategy." Brighttech's growth strategy. She was using corporate buzzwords to mask her lack of substantive preparation, hoping that professional language would compensate for missing knowledge. It was a tactic I'd seen before in business school, when unprepared students would rely on jargon and generalities to navigate presentations they hadn't adequately researched. "Absolutely," I agreed. "Summit Industries represents such a significant opportunity. I'm sure they'll have detailed questions about implementation timelines, budget allocations, and performance metrics. Those are always the areas where executive teams want to dig deep before making investment decisions." I watched Amanda's face as I mentioned each technical area, noting the micro-expressions that revealed her growing panic. She knew she couldn't discuss implementation timelines because she'd never seen my detailed project plans. She couldn't explain budget allocations because she'd never reviewed my financial analysis. And she certainly couldn't defend performance metrics because she didn't understand the analytical methodology behind my projections. "Right, exactly," Amanda said, nodding vigorously while her eyes betrayed her desperation. "That's why I was hoping to review those supplementary files, just to make sure I have all the details fresh in my mind." "Tell you what," I said as if struck by sudden inspiration. "Why don't I bring printed copies of the key documents to the meeting? That way, if any specific questions come up, we'll have the detailed information right there. It might actually be more helpful than trying to review everything in the next 20 minutes. Amanda's relief was palpable, but it was also misguided. She thought I was offering to rescue her from her unprepared state, providing the safety net she needed to successfully present my stolen work. What she didn't realize was that I was setting up a scenario where her lack of knowledge would be even more dramatically exposed. "That would be incredibly helpful," she said gratefully. "I really appreciate your support on this, Jess. It's exactly this kind of teamwork that makes our department so effective." Teamwork. The word felt bitter coming from someone who'd systematically erased my contributions and stolen credit for months of my intellectual labor. But I smiled and nodded, maintaining the facade of collaborative support while internally preparing for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As Amanda hurried away to make final preparations for her stolen presentation, I gathered my materials and began printing selected documents from my comprehensive strategy files. But I wasn't printing the information that would help Amanda succeed in her deception. Instead, I was selecting the most technical, detailed, and complex analyses I'd developed, the documents that would require deep understanding to explain and defend. The implementation timeline I printed was the complete 30-page version that broke down the customer retention strategy into daily action items across 6 months. It included technical dependencies, staff training requirements, and integration protocols that Amanda had never seen and couldn't possibly understand without extensive explanation. The budget analysis was equally comprehensive, featuring detailed cost breakdowns for software licensing, personnel allocation, and performance monitoring systems that Amanda knew nothing about. Most importantly, I printed my risk assessment matrix, a complex document that identified 47 potential obstacles to successful implementation and detailed contingency plans for each scenario. This was the kind of analysis that demonstrated true strategic thinking, the ability to anticipate problems and develop solutions before they occurred. It was also completely incomprehensible to someone who hadn't been involved in its development. At exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the main conference room carrying a thick folder of documentation and wearing my most professional demeanor. Summit Industries' executive team was already seated around the polished table. 3 serious-looking individuals in expensive suits who radiated the kind of analytical intelligence that built successful manufacturing companies. Chen was making introductory small talk, clearly excited about the opportunity to present Brighttech's capabilities to such influential potential clients. Amanda was standing at the front of the room, laptop connected to the large display screen, projecting my stolen presentation slides with an air of nervous confidence. She'd changed into her most authoritative outfit and was attempting to project executive presence. But I could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Wonderful. Now that Jessica has joined us, we can begin, Michael announced, gesturing for me to take a seat at the table. Amanda will be presenting our comprehensive customer retention strategy, with Jessica providing technical support for any detailed implementation questions. I settled into my chair and opened my folder, arranging the printed documents where Amanda could see them but not read their contents. Her eyes immediately fixed on the materials I'd brought, clearly hoping they would provide the lifeline she needed to navigate technical questions. What she didn't realize was that the documents I'd selected would only expose her lack of understanding more dramatically. Amanda began her presentation exactly as I'd written it, walking through the customer segmentation analysis and explaining the predictive analytics methodology with the practiced delivery of someone who'd memorized my talking points. For the first 15 minutes, she maintained her composure effectively, presenting my research findings and strategic recommendations with reasonable confidence. The Summit Industries executives listened attentively, occasionally nodding or taking notes, but their expressions remained professionally neutral. These were experienced business leaders who'd sat through countless presentations, and they were clearly reserving judgment until they understood the practical implications of the proposed strategy. Then came the first technical question, and Amanda's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "This predictive analytics component is interesting," said Janet Morrison, Summit Industries' Chief Operations Officer. "Can you walk us through the specific algorithms you're using to identify at-risk customers? We've tried similar approaches in the past, but we've struggled with false positive rates in our predictive models." Amanda's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught the moment of panic that flashed across her face. She was being asked to explain technical methodology that she'd never developed and didn't understand. The question required detailed knowledge of statistical analysis, machine learning, protocols, and data validation techniques, expertise that couldn't be faked through confident presentation skills. "That's an excellent question," Amanda said, attempting to buy time while she figured out how to respond. "The algorithm selection process was quite comprehensive, and we evaluated multiple approaches before settling on our final methodology." It was a classic deflection technique, acknowledging the question without actually answering it. But Janet Morrison wasn't satisfied with generalities, and her follow-up question cut straight to the heart of Amanda's deception. Specifically, are you using regression analysis, decision trees, or neural networks for your predictive modeling? Janet pressed. And how are you handling data pre-processing to minimize noise in your training datasets? The color drained from Amanda's face as she realized she was being asked to defend technical choices she'd never made using terminology she barely understood. She glanced desperately at the documents in my folder, hoping I might slide her a cheat sheet, but I maintained my neutral expression and waited for her response. "We actually used a hybrid approach," Amanda said finally, her voice slightly strained, "combining multiple methodologies to optimize accuracy across different customer segments." It was the kind of vague, buzzword-heavy response that someone might use when they didn't actually know what they were talking about. And Janet Morrison, who clearly had substantial experience with predictive analytics, wasn't buying it for a second. "Interesting," Janet said, her tone growing more skeptical. "Could you show us some sample output from your models? I'd particularly like to see the confusion matrices and ROC curves for your validation testing." Amanda was now in full panic mode, faced with a request for technical documentation that she couldn't possibly produce because she'd never actually built the models she was claiming to have developed. She looked at me with desperate eyes, clearly, hoping I would jump in and rescue her from the technical discussion she couldn't navigate. But I remained silent, maintaining my role as backup support while watching Amanda struggle to answer questions about work she'd stolen but never understood. This was exactly the scenario I'd anticipated when I decided not to provide her with the detailed technical files she'd requested. "The validation testing results are quite comprehensive," Amanda said, stalling for time. "Jessica, would you mind sharing some of those technical details with the team?" There it was. Less than 20 minutes into her stolen presentation, Amanda was already trying to push the technical discussion onto me, revealing that she didn't actually understand the work she was presenting. But her request also gave me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly who had developed the strategy she was claiming as her own. "Of course," I said, standing and moving to the front of the room. "I'd be happy to walk through the technical methodology." I opened my laptop and pulled up the detailed analytics files that Amanda had never seen, projecting complex statistical outputs and model validation results onto the screen. For the next 10 minutes, I provided comprehensive answers to every technical question Summit Industries executives asked, explaining algorithmic choices, defending methodological decisions, and demonstrating deep familiarity with every aspect of the predictive modeling process. The contrast between Amanda's vague deflections and my detailed technical knowledge was striking and impossible to ignore. While she'd struggled to explain basic concepts, I was discussing advanced statistical techniques with the fluency of someone who'd actually developed the models being questioned. Chen's expression grew increasingly confused as he watched me provide technical expertise that Amanda clearly lacked. He'd been told that Amanda was the strategic architect of the customer retention plan, but I was demonstrating knowledge that suggested much deeper involvement in the project's development. "Jessica seems remarkably familiar with these technical details," observed Robert Kim, Summit Industries CEO. "Were you involved in developing the predictive modeling component?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, demanding an answer that would either force Amanda to admit her deception or compel me to lie about my own contributions. Amanda looked at me with a mixture of desperation and barely concealed panic, clearly hoping I would downplay my involvement and maintain the fiction that she was the project's primary architect. But I'd reached my breaking point. After months of watching Amanda take credit for my ideas, after being systematically erased from a project that represented the best work of my career, after witnessing her attempt to steal my professional opportunities through calculated deception, I was done protecting her from the consequences of her actions. "Actually, I developed the entire predictive analytics methodology," I said calmly, looking directly at Robert Kim. "The customer segmentation analysis, the risk identification algorithms, and the performance validation protocols, all of that was my work over the past 3 months." The silence that followed my statement was deafening. Amanda's face went white as she realized that her deception had been exposed in front of the most important clients Brighttech had ever pursued. Chen looked stunned, clearly trying to reconcile what he'd been told about the project's origins with what I was revealing. And Summit Industries executives were watching the entire exchange with the sharp attention of people who'd just witnessed a professional meltdown that called into question everything they'd been told about Brighttech's capabilities and integrity. "I'm sorry. I think there might be some confusion here," Amanda said desperately, attempting to regain control of the narrative. This has been a collaborative project from the beginning, and while Jessica has certainly provided valuable technical support, the overall strategic vision and project leadership has been my responsibility. Collaborative project, valuable technical support, strategic vision, and project leadership. Amanda was still trying to minimize my contributions while claiming credit for work she'd never done, even as her deception crumbled around her. But I was no longer willing to accept her distorted version of events, and I had 3 months of documentation to prove exactly what had happened. I have comprehensive records of my work on this project, I said, maintaining my calm professional tone, including initial research files, development timelines, and detailed analysis that predates any of Amanda's involvement. If you'd like to review the complete project documentation, I can provide everything from conception through final implementation planning. Amanda's last hope for maintaining her deception evaporated as I offered to provide evidence of my actual contributions. She couldn't match my offer because she had no equivalent documentation. She couldn't defend her claims because she lacked the technical knowledge to engage in detailed discussion. And she couldn't explain away the obvious disparity between her vague presentations and my comprehensive expertise. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but the dynamic had completely shifted. Summit Industries executives directed their technical questions exclusively to me, clearly recognizing that I was the person who actually understood the strategy they were evaluating. Amanda stood awkwardly at the side of the room, occasionally attempting to interject strategic commentary, but mostly remaining silent as her stolen presentation was taken over by the person who'd actually created it. By the end of the meeting, Robert Kim was discussing implementation timelines directly with me, asking about my availability for project management responsibilities and expressing enthusiasm for working with someone who clearly had deep expertise in customer retention analytics. Janet Morrison requested copies of my technical documentation and suggested scheduling follow-up meetings to discuss integration with Summit Industries' existing systems. As the Summit Industries team gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Robert Kim addressed both Amanda and me, but his focus was clearly on my contributions. "This has been a very enlightening presentation," he said diplomatically. "We're impressed with the analytical rigor and strategic thinking behind this customer retention approach. Jessica, we'd like to schedule some additional technical discussions with you specifically. We have some complex integration challenges that would benefit from your expertise." After the clients left, Michael Chen asked both Amanda and me to remain in the conference room. His expression was serious and concerned, clearly recognizing that something significant had just happened that required immediate attention and investigation. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Amanda's carefully constructed deception was about to face the full scrutiny it deserved. The conference room felt smaller with just the 3 of us remaining. Michael Chen closed the door and returned to his seat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but clearly troubled by what he'd witnessed during the Summit Industries presentation. Amanda remained standing near the presentation screen, her earlier confidence completely shattered, while I sat calmly in my chair, finally feeling the weight of months of deception lifting from my shoulders. Michael looked between Amanda and me for a long moment before speaking, clearly trying to process the dramatic shift that had occurred during what was supposed to be a straightforward client presentation. "I think we need to have a very honest conversation about what just happened in there," he began, his voice measured but firm. "Amanda, when you briefed me yesterday morning about the Summit Industries strategy, you presented it as your own work. But based on what I observed today, Jessica appears to have much deeper knowledge of the technical components than you do." Amanda's face flushed red, and she began to fidget with her presentation remote, clearly struggling to find a response that would salvage her position without outright lying to our supervisor. "Michael, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice strained but attempting to project injured innocence. "This project has always been a collaborative effort. I've been serving as the strategic lead, coordinating different components, and ensuring overall coherence, while Jessica has been handling some of the more technical analysis work. Strategic lead, coordinating different components. It was remarkable how quickly Amanda could reframe her theft as collaborative leadership, attempting to position herself as the project manager who delegated technical work to me while maintaining overall responsibility for strategic direction. But Michael had been in business long enough to recognize professional manipulation when he saw it, and Amanda's explanation didn't align with what he'd observed during the client meeting. Amanda, the clients were asking about fundamental strategic decisions, algorithm selection, methodological approaches, validation techniques, Michael said, his tone growing more serious. Those aren't technical implementation details. Those are core strategic choices that would be made by whoever developed the overall approach. I watched Amanda's face as Michael dismantled her attempt to reposition herself as the strategic architect of my work. She was trapped between her need to maintain her deception and the obvious evidence that she lacked knowledge any strategic lead would possess. Jessica has been very thorough in her technical research, Amanda said, attempting another deflection. Sometimes the people doing the detailed work become more familiar with specific methodologies than the overall project leader. It was a desperate attempt to explain away her ignorance, suggesting that my deep knowledge was somehow a byproduct of technical specialization rather than evidence of actual strategic development. But the explanation rang hollow, especially given the comprehensive nature of the question she'd been unable to answer. Michael turned to me, his expression expectant. Jessica, can you help me understand your role in this project? Because what I observed today suggests much more involvement than Amanda indicated when she briefed me yesterday. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since watching Amanda steal my presentation the day before. The moment when I could finally tell the truth about 3 months of systematic deception and intellectual theft. But I also knew that my response would determine not just Amanda's fate, but my own professional reputation and future at Bright Tech. I took a deep breath and looked directly at Michael, choosing my words carefully but speaking with absolute conviction. Michael, I developed this entire customer retention strategy from conception to final implementation planning, I said calmly. I conducted all the initial research, performed the customer segmentation analysis, designed the predictive analytics methodology, created the budget projections, and wrote the comprehensive implementation plan. Amanda's involvement was limited to periodic check-ins where I shared my progress and received feedback. The silence that followed my statement was profound. Amanda's face went white as she realized that I was no longer protecting her deception, no longer willing to allow her to take credit for my intellectual contributions. That's not true, Amanda said quickly, her voice rising with panic. Jessica is minimizing the collaborative nature of this project. Yes, she did excellent technical work, but the overall strategic vision, the client relationship management, the presentation development, that was all my responsibility. Strategic vision, client relationship management, presentation development. Amanda was listing general project management functions while avoiding any mention of the actual analytical work that formed the core of the strategy. She was trying to claim credit for coordination while ignoring the substance of what had been coordinated. But I had months of documentation to support my claims, and I was finally ready to use it. I have comprehensive records of my work on this project, I said, pulling out my laptop and opening the detailed file structure I'd created. Every research document, every analysis file, every iteration of the strategy development is time-stamped and saved in my personal folders. I can show you exactly when each component was created and how the strategy evolved over time. I turned my laptop screen toward Michael, displaying the organized folder structure that contained months of my intellectual labor. Dozens of files, with clear timestamps showing progressive development from initial research through final strategic recommendations. Detailed analytics spreadsheets with complex formulas I'd developed. draft presentations showing iterative refinement of messaging and approach. Most importantly, I showed Michael the metadata that proved when each file had been created and last modified. The timestamps told a clear story of independent development that predated any collaboration with Amanda by weeks or months. As you can see, the foundational research for this project was completed in early August, I said, scrolling through my files. The predictive analytics methodology was finalized in mid-September. The comprehensive strategy document was completed 2 weeks ago. All of this work was done independently, with Amanda's involvement limited to review and feedback sessions. Michael studied my laptop screen intently, clearly recognizing the implications of what I was showing him. The level of documentation and the obvious progression of analytical thinking couldn't be faked or assembled after the fact. This was evidence of sustained intellectual work over multiple months. Amanda watched in growing desperation as Michael reviewed my files, realizing that her deception was being systematically dismantled by evidence she couldn't refute or explain away. "Jessica, if this documentation is accurate, it appears that you were the primary architect of this strategy," Michael said slowly. "Amanda, can you provide similar documentation of your strategic contributions?" The question hung in the air, like a trap. Amanda couldn't provide equivalent documentation because she hadn't done equivalent work. She couldn't demonstrate strategic development because she'd never actually developed strategy. She could only offer vague claims about collaboration and coordination that wouldn't stand up to detailed scrutiny. "Michael, I think you're getting caught up in technical details and missing the bigger picture," Amanda said, attempting to redirect the conversation away from documentation she couldn't produce. Project leadership isn't just about creating files. It's about vision, coordination, client relationship management, strategic thinking at the executive level. But Michael was no longer interested in Amanda's attempts to reframe the situation. He'd seen enough evidence to understand what had actually happened, and his expression was growing more serious by the minute. "Amanda, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer," he said firmly. "Did you develop the customer retention strategy that you presented to Summit Industries yesterday and today?" The directness of the question left no room for deflection or manipulation. Amanda was being forced to either admit her deception or lie outright to our supervisor. Her face cycled through multiple expressions as she calculated her options, clearly recognizing that any answer she gave would have serious professional consequences. "Michael, I think the real issue here is that Jessica is trying to take credit for collaborative work," Amanda said, attempting one final deflection. "She's rewriting the history of this project to minimize my contributions and exaggerate her own role." It was a desperate attempt to turn the accusation back on me, to position herself as the victim of my professional ambition rather than the perpetrator of systematic theft. But her response was also a non-answer that avoided Michael's direct question about her actual contributions. "That's not what I asked," Michael said, his tone growing firmer. "I asked whether you developed the strategy you presented. Can you answer that question directly?" Amanda's silence was answer enough. She couldn't claim to have developed work. That clearly belonged to me. But she also couldn't admit to the deception without destroying her professional credibility. She was trapped by her own lies, unable to move forward without revealing the truth she'd been trying to hide. After nearly a minute of uncomfortable silence, Michael spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of disappointed authority. "I think I have enough information to understand what happened here," he said. "Amanda, I'm going to need you to submit a written report detailing your actual contributions to this project with specific documentation of any strategic development work you performed. Jessica, I'd like you to provide me with copies of all your project files so I can review the complete development timeline." He was conducting a formal investigation, creating an official record that would determine not just the truth about the Summit Industries project, but Amanda's future at BrightTech. The casual theft and deception that had characterized our working relationship was now subject to corporate scrutiny that would have lasting professional consequences. Michael, I think this whole situation is being blown out of proportion, Amanda said, making one last attempt to minimize the seriousness of what had occurred. We had a successful client presentation, Summit Industries is interested in moving forward, and now we're getting bogged down in questions about who deserves credit for what. Shouldn't we be focusing on closing the deal rather than relitigating project history? But Michael wasn't interested in Amanda's attempts to redirect attention away from her deception. The successful client presentation had been successful precisely because I'd been there to provide the technical expertise that Amanda lacked. Summit Industries was interested in moving forward because they'd been impressed by knowledge and competence that Amanda couldn't demonstrate. Amanda, this isn't about credit or recognition, Michael said seriously. This is about professional integrity and accurate representation of our capabilities to clients. If we can't honestly represent who developed our strategies, how can clients trust us to honestly represent the results those strategies will deliver? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Michael asking detailed questions about project timelines, collaborative processes, and the specific circumstances that had led to Amanda presenting my work as her own. With each question, Amanda's explanations became more convoluted and less credible, while my documentation provided clear evidence of independent strategic development. By the end of the meeting, Michael had requested formal written statements from both of us, scheduled individual follow-up meetings to review our documentation in detail, and indicated that he would be discussing the situation with human resources to determine appropriate next steps. As we left the conference room, Amanda made one final attempt to salvage our working relationship, approaching me with a combination of desperation and barely concealed anger. Jessica? I hope you understand what you've just done, she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. You've potentially destroyed both of our careers over what should have been a simple collaborative project. We could have worked this out, privately, instead of creating a public spectacle. Destroyed both of our careers. Worked this out privately. Public spectacle. Amanda was still trying to position the revelation of her deception as somehow equivalent to the deception itself, suggesting that my decision to tell the truth was as professionally damaging as her decision to steal credit for my work. But I was done accepting responsibility for Amanda's choices and their consequences. Amanda, you made the decision to present my work as your own, I said calmly. You made the choice to erase my contributions and take credit for months of my intellectual labor. I didn't create this situation. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your actions. Her face flushed with anger as she realized that I was no longer the compliant colleague who would absorb her manipulation. In silence, "You have no idea what you've just done to yourself," she said, her voice dropping to an angry whisper. Michael values loyalty and team collaboration. Making accusations against senior colleagues isn't going to advance your career here. But her threats no longer carried any power over me. I'd already proven my competence and value to Summit Industries executives. I'd demonstrated expertise that Amanda couldn't match and knowledge that she couldn't fake. Whatever happened next, I would face it with clear conscience and documented evidence of my contributions. Over the following week, Michael conducted his investigation with thorough professionalism. He reviewed all my project files, examined the timestamps and development progression, and interviewed other team members about their observations of the project's development. He also gave Amanda multiple opportunities to provide documentation of her strategic contributions, but she was unable to produce any evidence of substantial intellectual involvement. The results of Michael's investigation were conclusive and damning. My documentation clearly demonstrated that I had been the primary architect of the Summit Industries strategy, with Amanda's involvement limited to periodic review sessions and feedback conversations. There was no evidence that Amanda had contributed significant strategic thinking, analytical work, or creative development to the project. More problematically, Michael discovered that this wasn't the first time Amanda had taken inappropriate credit for team members' work. When he began asking other colleagues about their experiences, a pattern of behavior emerged that painted Amanda as someone who systematically exploited collaborative relationships to advance her own career at others' expense. The human resources investigation that followed was swift and decisive. Amanda was terminated for professional misconduct, specifically for misrepresenting her contributions to client projects and taking false credit for intellectual work performed by team members. The termination was immediate and non-negotiable, with Amanda escorted from the building the same day the decision was announced. But the most significant outcome wasn't Amanda's departure, it was the recognition and opportunity that followed. For me, Summit Industries had specifically requested to work with me on their customer retention project, impressed by the expertise and strategic thinking I'd demonstrated during our presentation. Michael promoted me to senior marketing strategist with responsibility for managing the Summit Industries relationship and developing similar analytical approaches for other major clients. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, expanded responsibilities, and recognition as someone who could develop innovative strategies that delivered real business results. More importantly, it established me as a valued contributor whose intellectual work would be properly credited and protected going forward. Within 6 months, the customer retention strategy I'd developed for Summit Industries was generating measurable results that exceeded our initial projections. Customer retention rates increased by 22%, customer lifetime value improved by 18%, and Summit Industries was so pleased with the outcomes that they expanded their contract with BrightTech to include additional analytical services. The success of the Summit Industries project led to other opportunities. Other clients who wanted to work with someone who could combine analytical rigor with creative strategic thinking. I began presenting at industry conferences, sharing insights about customer retention analytics and predictive modeling techniques. My work was featured in marketing journals and business publications, establishing me as a thought leader in customer relationship strategy. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the mentoring program I developed for junior team members, designed to help them protect their intellectual contributions and advocate for proper recognition of their work. I'd learned firsthand how easy it was for collaborative relationships to become exploitative, and I wanted to ensure that other talented professionals wouldn't face the same systematic theft that had nearly derailed my career. The program focused on documentation practices, professional communication skills, and strategies for maintaining ownership of intellectual work, while still collaborating effectively with team members. I taught participants how to recognize manipulation, how to set appropriate boundaries, and how to advocate for themselves when their contributions were being minimized or appropriated. Most importantly, I shared my own story, not as a cautionary tale about workplace betrayal, but as an example of how standing up for yourself and your work could lead to recognition, opportunity, and professional growth that would have been impossible if you remained silent about unfair treatment. Looking back now, I can see that Amanda's theft was actually a gift, though certainly not one I would have chosen at the time. Her deception forced me to document my work more comprehensively, to develop stronger professional boundaries, and to advocate for myself with clarity and conviction. When the moment came to choose between protecting her from the consequences of her actions and protecting my own professional integrity, I chose myself, and that choice changed everything. The experience taught me that collaboration and teamwork are valuable, but only when they're built on mutual respect and honest recognition of each person's contributions. When collaboration becomes exploitation, when teamwork becomes theft, when professional relationships are used to advance one person's career at another's expense, the only appropriate response is to protect your own work and speak the truth about what actually happened. Amanda thought she could steal my success, but she only revealed the difference between borrowed credibility and authentic expertise. She thought she could erase my contributions, but she only highlighted the value of my intellectual work. She thought she could advance her career through deception, But she only demonstrated that stolen accomplishments are built on unstable foundations that collapse under scrutiny. The Summit Industries project wasn't just a professional victory. It was a personal transformation. I stopped being the accommodating colleague who absorbed manipulation in silence and became someone who insisted on accurate recognition of her contributions. I stopped shrinking my accomplishments to make others comfortable and started claiming the credit I'd earned through talent, hard work, and innovative thinking. And when I finally stood up for myself, when I finally insisted on being valued for my actual contributions rather than accepting whatever scraps of recognition others were willing to offer, I discovered that my work was more valuable than I'd ever realized. The expertise I'd been giving away for free was worth promotions, raises, client relationships, and professional opportunities that transformed my entire career trajectory. Amanda learned that stealing someone's work is easy, but defending it requires knowledge and competence that can't be faked. She learned that intellectual theft might provide short-term advancement, but it creates long-term vulnerability that eventually destroys professional credibility. Most importantly, she learned that the people you exploit today might become the people who expose your deception tomorrow. I learned that my ideas, my analytical skills, and my strategic thinking were worth fighting for. I learned that professional integrity isn't just about being honest. It's about insisting that others be honest about your contributions. I learned that the most empowering thing you can do for your career is to stop accepting unfair treatment and start demanding the recognition you deserve. The woman who walked into that Summit Industries presentation was someone who'd been systematically diminished and exploited by a colleague she'd trusted. The woman who walked out was someone who'd reclaimed her professional identity and established herself as a strategist worth recognizing, promoting, and celebrating. Amanda tried to steal my project, but she ended up giving me something much more valuable. The knowledge that I was capable of creating work worth stealing, the confidence to defend my intellectual contributions, and the courage to insist on being valued for who I really was, rather than accepting whatever others were willing to offer. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is having someone try to destroy it, because surviving their attempts to diminish you reveals strengths you never knew you possessed and opportunities you never would have pursued if you'd remained comfortable in unfair circumstances. I chose to stand up for my work, and my work stood up for me. That's a lesson worth learning, a story worth telling, and a transformation worth celebrating, no matter how painful the process might be. 2 years have passed since that devastating moment when I discovered Amanda presenting my work as her own, and I can honestly say that her betrayal became the catalyst for the most significant professional transformation of my life. What started as the worst day of my career evolved into the foundation for success I never could have imagined when I first walked through Brighttech's doors as an eager but uncertain marketing analyst. The Summit Industries project didn't just establish my reputation within Brighttech. It opened doors throughout the entire customer retention industry. Within 8 months of Amanda's termination, I was receiving speaking invitations from major conferences, consulting requests from Fortune 500 companies, and job offers from competitors who'd heard about the innovative analytical approach I'd developed. But rather than leaving Brighttech, I chose to build something even more meaningful within the company that had ultimately supported my professional growth. Chen, who had handled the investigation with such thoroughness and integrity, became more than just my supervisor. He became a mentor who helped me understand how to leverage my technical expertise into broader business leadership. He taught me that being right about the facts wasn't enough. I needed to learn how to communicate my value proposition to executives who cared more about business outcomes than analytical methodology. Under his guidance, I developed presentation skills that could make complex data compelling to non-technical audiences, and strategic thinking that connected analytical insights to revenue growth and competitive advantage. The promotion to senior marketing strategist was just the beginning. Within 18 months, I was leading a team of 5 analysts and data scientists, developing customer retention strategies for Brighttech's entire client portfolio. The department that had once been dominated by Amanda's manipulative politics became a collaborative environment where everyone's contributions were properly recognized and intellectual work was carefully protected through clear documentation and attribution practices. But the real transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The experience of being systematically undermined and then standing up for myself had fundamentally changed how I approached relationships, both in the workplace and beyond. I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics before they could take root, to set boundaries that protected my time and intellectual energy, and to advocate for myself with confidence rather than hoping others would eventually notice my contributions. The mentoring program I developed became one of Brighttech's most successful employee development initiatives, with junior staff members from across the company participating in workshops about professional advocacy, intellectual property protection, and collaborative relationship management. But the most rewarding aspect wasn't teaching technical skills. It was watching other people discover their own voices and learn to demand the recognition they deserved. Chen, a brilliant data scientist who'd been consistently overshadowed by her more vocal teammates, learned to document her algorithmic innovations and present her findings with authority that commanded respect. Marcus Williams, a creative strategist whose ideas were routinely appropriated by senior colleagues, developed communication techniques that ensured his contributions were acknowledged and protected. Jennifer Rodriguez, a project manager who'd been relegated to administrative tasks despite her strategic capabilities, gained the confidence to propose her own client initiatives and establish herself as a thought leader within the organization. Each success story reinforced my belief that Amanda's theft had ultimately served a greater purpose. Her betrayal had forced me to develop skills and perspectives that I now use to empower others facing similar challenges. The woman who'd tried to destroy my career had inadvertently created someone dedicated to ensuring that intellectual exploitation became impossible within our organizational culture. The financial transformation was equally dramatic. My base salary had increased by 60% since the Summit Industries project, but the real wealth building came from consulting opportunities and speaking engagements that established me as an expert in predictive customer analytics. Companies across multiple industries wanted to understand how to implement the methodologies I'd developed, and they were willing to pay substantial consulting fees for access to expertise that had proven its value through measurable business results. I used that financial success to invest in continuing education, obtaining certifications in advanced statistical modeling and machine learning that kept me at the forefront of analytical innovation. I also started building an investment portfolio focused on technology companies developing customer relationship tools, using my industry knowledge to identify opportunities that other investors might overlook. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my personal relationships. The experience of being betrayed by someone I'd trusted had initially made me more cautious about forming close friendships, but ultimately it taught me to value authenticity over convenience. I learned to distinguish between people who were genuinely interested in mutual support and those who were primarily focused on what they could extract from the relationship. My friendship with Rachel Kim, the graphic designer who'd supported me throughout the Amanda crisis, deepened into something more meaningful than casual workplace camaraderie. Rachel had witnessed my transformation from someone who absorbed mistreatment in silence to someone who insisted on being valued appropriately, and she'd learned from my example to advocate more effectively for her own creative contributions. We became accountability partners who helped each other navigate workplace politics with integrity, while building careers based on genuine competence rather than manipulative tactics. I also developed relationships with other women in leadership, positions who understood the unique challenges of establishing professional credibility in environments where female expertise was often questioned or minimized. Through industry networking events and professional organizations, I connected with executives, entrepreneurs, and consultants who'd faced similar battles and emerged stronger for having fought them. These relationships weren't just social connections, they became a professional network that opened opportunities, provided strategic advice, and offered support during challenging moments. When I was considering whether to accept a vice president position at a larger company, these women helped me evaluate the opportunity objectively and negotiate terms that reflected my true market value. When I was developing new service offerings, for Bright Tech, they provided insights about industry trends and client needs that informed more effective strategic positioning. The Amanda experience had taught me that professional success wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about building relationships with people who respected your contributions and supported your growth. The colleagues who tried to diminish your accomplishments weren't worth accommodating, but the ones who celebrated your successes and pushed you to reach higher levels of performance were invaluable assets worthy of significant investment. My approach to client relationships also evolved dramatically. Instead of simply delivering analytical services and hoping clients would recognize their value, I learned to position myself as a strategic partner who could transform their business outcomes through innovative thinking and rigorous methodology. I developed presentation techniques that made complex analysis accessible to executive audiences, and I created implementation frameworks that ensured my recommendations could be executed effectively by client teams. The Summit Industries relationship became a model for this approach. Rather than just providing customer retention analysis, I worked with their leadership team to integrate predictive analytics into their broader business strategy, helping them identify new market opportunities and optimize resource allocation across multiple departments. The relationship expanded from a single marketing project to a comprehensive analytical partnership that generated over $8 million in additional revenue for both companies. This success attracted attention from other major clients who wanted similar strategic partnerships. I found myself working with manufacturing companies, technology firms, healthcare organizations, and financial services providers, each presenting unique analytical challenges that required creative problem-solving and innovative methodological approaches. But the most satisfying projects were those where I could identify and mentor talented analysts within client organizations who were facing challenges similar to what I'd experienced with Amanda. These were often brilliant professionals whose contributions were being minimized by colleagues who lacked their technical expertise but possessed superior political skills. By teaching them how to document their work, communicate their value proposition, and advocate for appropriate recognition, I was able to help them avoid the systematic exploitation that had nearly derailed my own career. One particularly memorable case involved Dr. Lisa Park, a statistician at a pharmaceutical company whose groundbreaking research methodology was being presented at industry conferences by her department head, who had contributed nothing to its development. Using techniques I'd learned from my own experience, I helped Lisa document her intellectual contributions, present her findings with authority, and establish direct relationships with industry leaders who recognized her expertise. Within 6 months, Lisa had been promoted to lead her own research team, received a substantial salary increase, and begun publishing papers that established her reputation as an innovator in pharmaceutical analytics. Her department head, meanwhile, was exposed as someone who took credit for others' work and was quietly transferred to a position with significantly reduced responsibilities. These interventions weren't just professionally satisfying, they were emotionally healing. Each time I helped someone else avoid or overcome intellectual theft, I was retrospectively protecting the version of myself who'd been vulnerable to Amanda's manipulation. I was creating the support system that I wished had existed when I was struggling to understand why my contributions were being systematically erased. The speaking opportunities that emerged from my professional success became platforms for addressing broader issues about workplace equity, intellectual property protection, and collaborative relationship management. I developed presentations that combined analytical insights with practical advice about professional advocacy, helping audiences understand both the technical aspects of customer retention strategy and the interpersonal skills necessary to ensure their contributions were properly valued. These presentations often included my own story about overcoming professional betrayal, But I was careful to frame the experience as a learning opportunity rather than a victim narrative. The focus was always on the strategies and techniques that had enabled my recovery and growth, not on the details of Amanda's deception. Audiences were more interested in actionable advice they could apply to their own careers than in dramatic stories about workplace conflict. The response to these presentations was consistently enthusiastic, with professionals from diverse industries expressing gratitude for practical guidance about navigating workplace politics while maintaining professional integrity. Many attendees reached out months later to share their own success stories about advocating for recognition, protecting intellectual contributions, and building careers based on authentic expertise rather than manipulative tactics. These speaking engagements also led to writing opportunities that allowed me to reach even broader audiences. I contributed articles to business journals about analytical methodology, workplace collaboration, and professional development strategies. I wrote case studies about customer retention transformation that were used in business school curricula. I even began working on a book about building analytical expertise into sustainable competitive advantage, combining technical insights with strategic thinking and professional advocacy skills. But the most meaningful writing was more personal: blog posts and articles about overcoming professional setbacks, learning from betrayal, and using difficult experiences as catalysts for growth. These pieces resonated with readers who'd faced similar challenges, and they generated ongoing conversations about workplace equity, intellectual property protection, and the importance of advocating for yourself when others won't advocate for you. The comments and messages I received from these articles revealed how common experiences like mine actually were. Professional women across industries shared stories about having their ideas appropriated, their contributions minimized, and their expertise questioned by colleagues with inferior knowledge but superior political skills. The response made it clear that Amanda's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of workplace exploitation that affected countless talented professionals who lacked the tools or confidence to protect themselves effectively. This realization motivated me to expand my mentoring efforts beyond Bright Tech, creating workshops and consulting services specifically designed to help professionals in vulnerable positions develop advocacy skills and protection strategies. I partnered with professional organizations, universities, and corporate diversity programs to deliver training that combined practical techniques with strategic thinking about career development and relationship management. The financial success of these initiatives allowed me to invest in creating more comprehensive resources, online courses, downloadable toolkits, and video training programs that could reach professionals who couldn't attend in-person workshops. I developed assessment tools that helped people identify potential exploitation in their current workplace relationships, and communication templates that made it easier to advocate for appropriate recognition and protection of intellectual contributions. But the most rewarding aspect of this expanded work was seeing the multiplier effect as people I'd trained began helping others in their own organizations. Sarah Chen, who'd gained confidence through my original mentoring program at Bright Tech, began leading similar initiatives at her new company. Marcus Williams used techniques he'd learned to help junior colleagues protect their creative contributions. Jennifer Rodriguez started a professional development group for project managers facing similar challenges to what she'd experienced. Each person who learned to advocate effectively for themselves became someone who could teach others the same skills, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond my direct influence. The woman who'd nearly been destroyed by Amanda's betrayal was now part of a network of professionals committed to ensuring that intellectual exploitation became increasingly difficult to sustain. Looking back now, I can see that Amanda's theft was actually the best thing that ever happened to my career, though I certainly couldn't have recognized it at the time. Her betrayal forced me to develop skills I never would have acquired otherwise: documentation practices that protected my intellectual contributions, communication techniques that commanded respect and recognition, strategic thinking that connected, my technical expertise to broader business value, and advocacy skills that ensured my contributions were appropriately credited and compensated. More importantly, Her deception taught me to trust my own judgment about professional relationships and workplace dynamics. I learned to recognize manipulation before it could take root, to set boundaries that protected my time and energy, and to prioritize collaborations with people who shared my commitment to mutual respect and honest recognition of contributions. The promotion, salary increases, consulting opportunities, and industry recognition were wonderful outcomes, but the real transformation was internal. I stopped being someone who hoped others would eventually notice her value and became someone who insisted on being valued appropriately. I stopped accepting unfair treatment in the name of teamwork and started demanding relationships built on genuine collaboration rather than exploitation. Amanda thought she could steal my success, but she actually gave me something much more valuable: the knowledge that my work was worth fighting for, the skills to protect my intellectual contributions, and the confidence to build a career based on authentic expertise rather than borrowed credibility. She tried to erase my professional identity, but she forced me to develop a stronger sense of self than I'd ever possessed. The customer retention strategies I develop now are more sophisticated than anything I could have created during my early days at Bright Tech. The client relationships I manage are more strategic and financially rewarding than the project-based work I was doing when Amanda stole my presentation. The team I lead is more collaborative and productive than any environment I'd experienced, before learning to set appropriate boundaries and advocate for fair treatment. But most importantly, the woman I've become is someone I actually respect. Someone who stands up for herself and others. Someone who builds success through competence and integrity rather than manipulation and theft. Someone who uses her expertise to empower others rather than diminish them. Amanda's betrayal didn't destroy my career. It revealed capabilities I never knew I possessed and opportunities I never would have pursued if I'd remained comfortable accepting unfair treatment. Her attempt to steal my work forced me to become someone whose contributions couldn't be stolen, whose expertise couldn't be replicated, and whose professional reputation was built on foundations too solid to be shaken by workplace politics or personal betrayal. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes the person who tries to destroy your career ends up giving you exactly what you need to build something better than you ever could have imagined. Sometimes betrayal becomes the foundation for transformation that wouldn't have been possible through any other path. I chose to stand up for my work, and my work has continued standing up for me ever since. That's a lesson worth learning, a story worth sharing, and a transformation worth celebrating, no matter how painful the journey might have been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won. Won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.